Hello and welcome to CPCine, the Amstrad CPC video magazine. This is the show where we take a look at a month in the life of Amstrad's phenomenal 8-bit home computer. This month, it's December 1984, and it's the CPC's first Christmas. With the Amstrad machine having been on store shelves for 6 months now, it has garnered a decent sized following and should be making its way under many a Christmas tree in the next few weeks. That's good news for us Amstrad users, because a larger user base means the computer will be supported for a lot longer. We can't wait to see what the future will have in store for our big black box of delights, but in the meantime, let's take a look at what we have in store for this episode. This month, we'll be taking a look at all the news for December 1984, trying out all the new released CPC games and software, checking out our first Christmas charts, and typing our brains out courtesy of Tasword. Can it beat the mighty Amstrad, which we reviewed last month? Keep watching and let's find out. Plus, we'll be mining manically with Miner Willie in the new CPC port of Manic Miner, travelling to a galaxy far, far away with a Star Wars trench run type-in courtesy of Amstrad Computer User, explaining how to record your CPC's video and audio output in this month's special feature, taking a look at a brilliant modern game called Escape, taking a look at another brand new release game, the Dawn of Kernel, and having a few final thoughts before we go. It's a busy schedule, so let's get into it. Christmas is here, and we can expect a lot of kids, and some big kids as well no doubt, will be waking up to a shiny new Amstrad CPC 464 under the tree this year. The machine has surpassed expectations and managed to become a resounding success in a packed computer market that's about to see the majority of machines die out. The march to the mid-80s was a grueling one, but when 1985 rolls around, it's obvious which machines will survive to the end of the decade, and the CPC will be one of them. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little, so let's see what the news on the ground was like in December 1984. The first news we have comes from issue 2 of Amstrad CPC 464 User, and that's the news, which I think we can all understand, that high street stores are reluctant to stock more serious applications on their shelves. Given the current turbulent times that the home computer industry is seeing, it's a brave shopkeeper who decides to buy in a bunch of accounting packages or a fourth compiler for whatever computers they're currently backing. What if that computer falls foul of the changing seas of consumer loyalty? It's going to be a hard task to shift that stock if the machine for it dies off. Consumers are far more likely to buy a Pac-Man clone or a Space Invaders game at remaindered prices in the event that their computer is on the way out but they still want to pass some time with it, but a remaindered copy of Home Accounting for the Compumatic 6000? That's going to be a harder sell. Consequently, Amstrad User mentions in their editorial that there's a hunger for serious software for the CPC 464, but the high street isn't looking to fill that need, in case they get stuck with stock that they can't shift after Christmas. We'll have to see how serious software fares on the high street once the number of competitors on the home computer market starts to die down in the coming year. The oldest member of Amstrad's user club is apparently Miss Cecile Chazalon of Hove, who was 74 at the time of issue 2's publication. Apparently, she was going to buy a BBC microcomputer, but saw the reviews for the CPC 464 and went for that one instead. A good choice, I think we can all agree. According to the magazine, she enjoys playing Electro Freddy and Master Chess, both very good games that have stood up well to the test of time. Popular Computing reports that Skywave have released an RS-232 interface for the CPC 464, which will be very welcome news to anyone who wants to use their CPC for communications or for linking it to pretty much anything other than a printer. The interface costs £71.30, which sounds a lot like someone didn't factor in VAT into the unit cost for that device. Meanwhile, the same company has also released a version of Forth for the CPC. Forth is a language that all scientists amongst our viewers will be familiar with, because we all had to learn this language at one time or another. Skywave's implementation, Fig Forth Standard, is priced at £20.70 and comes on cassette. Commodore have put an advert in Popular Computing Weekly and probably other magazines as well, which seems to take aim firmly at Amstrad's complete personal computer adverts. In the Amstrad ads, we see part of a computer as an incomplete jigsaw, followed by a completed jigsaw showing the CPC 464. The incomplete jigsaw, of course, being a reference to Amstrad's competitors. Commodore seems to have taken umbrage at this advert because their latest one shows a sawn-off set of function keys for the C64, an obvious reference to the missing jigsaw pieces on Amstrad's advert, and the missing piece, of course, being CPC 464's numeric keypad, which works as the CPC's function keys, alongside the question, are you only using 1/10 of your brain? Yeah, subtle, Commodore, very subtle. There's an interesting statement in the 6th of December issue of Popular Computing Weekly, a magazine that viewers may remember was slow to feature the CPC, but who now seem to sing its praises at every opportunity. In this issue, they note that the CPC 464 has been almost bug-free according to user reports, whereas it has become standard practice for a bug list to be published soon after the release of other microcomputers. Amstrad really did manage to create an excellent machine, and now the magazines are taking note of that. Alongside this praise is a piece of code to dump the CPC's ROM, which assembler and machine code programmers will find very useful, although regular users will find this a bit dry and not much use to them, especially since the working of the ROM is covered in Amstrad's complete firmware specification book, should anyone wish to actually take a look at it. Apparently that's also unusual as well, since most computers require an independent author to unlock the secrets of a computer's ROM, whereas Amstrad just sold you the book from the computer's launch day. If there's a market for it, why not sell to that market yourself? That's the Amstrad way. As I said though, most of this will be very dry and uninteresting to the average CPC user, but it is worth noting that, according to Popular Computing, there's a nice function in the way that the CPC handles memory, which allows the computer to make the most RAM available to the user as possible. According to this article, the CPC splits its ROM into two 16K blocks, with the upper block overlaying a portion of the screen RAM, while the lower block overlays a part of the user RAM space. The computer then uses what the magazine calls clever switching to allow the maximum amount of user RAM to be available for basic programming, although this isn't gone into in further detail. Perhaps this is something that we can discuss in a future feature for the show, since it is an interesting aspect of the CPC's internal workings. Houston consultants have arrived on the CPC scene, and they've done it in style. Launching the week before Christmas, so clearly aiming at the pockets of kids with a new computer and a load of Christmas money to spend, they have published a handful of choice titles, including Technician Ted. We'll have a full list of those titles in the new releases section later in this episode. Why have they launched so close to Christmas? For the same reasons we've seen a problem for users who want serious applications. Andrew Hewson told Popular Computing Weekly, this year's retailers have been far more cautious about stocking their shelves with software for Christmas itself. We feel there will be a demand after Christmas for new games. It's a smart move, I think we can all agree. CPC 464 Computing finishes out our news roundup for this episode. This cassette magazine has improved massively over issue 1, which we covered in episode 4, and now includes a reasonable amount of assembler code. The end result is that the magazine loads faster, which is a big improvement when each section has to be loaded in turn from cassette. According to CPC Computing, Presto have announced the launch of a modem for Amstrad users to access their online service. The reports suggest the modem will be similar to the ZX Spectrum model, which is only to be expected given the similarities between the two systems. The modem is expected to be able to download tele software and other online programs. I can't say I know what these things are, but maybe we can get our hands on one of these devices for a future episode. Don't hold your breath though, but we'll see what we can do. In keeping with the recent trend of not being able to tell when some software is going to be released, CPC Computing is following Popular Computing Weekly in discussing the launch of FlightPath 737 months after its launch. As you'll recall from the last episode, Popular Computing were talking about this program's debut in November 1984, when Amstrad Computer User had already reviewed it. The exact timing on early software launches seems to have been a little bit quirky. Back on the hardware front, we have the launch of DK-Tronic's speech synthesizer. This is another piece of kit that I'd really love to be able to take a look at in a future episode, so keep your eyes peeled for that showing up at some point in the future. According to CPC 464 Computing, the synthesizer allows users to build up words from phonemes rather than spelling everything phonetically for the best results. That's something that I really do want to see. Adverts in Popular Computing Weekly price the DK-Tronic speech synthesizer at $39.95, which makes it remarkably cheap if it does everything that it claims to do. As a final note before we move on, Popular Computing did a lovely write-up of 1984 in their final issue of the year, where it seems their copy editor may have been asleep at the wheel, because that's the only way I can explain the fact that they confused a Spectrum QL with an Amstrad CPC, in all of the photos accompanying the article. I want to make a joke here at this point, but I just can't. I'm flabbergasted. The names are printed in huge letters on the front of each machine. So how can someone mix them up? Given that it's the run-up to Christmas, we can expect a few choice titles to have been held back in the hopes of grabbing parents' attention so they can make their way into the Christmas stockings this year. On the gaming front, we have The Tomb of Kuzlak, a 3D dungeon crawler from D. Muir that's written in BASIC. A science fiction adventure game called Crystal Theft from Wikisoft. The well-loved classic Fruity Frank arrives courtesy of Kuma. Amsoft brings us American Football, a game that appears to be totally incompatible with the CPC 6128. A rather nice top-down implementation of Snooker arrives, also from Amsoft. Jet Set Willy clone Technician Ted, apparently also called The Chip Factory, arrives from Hewson. Heathrow International ATC, a 2-game collection from Hewson consisting of Concorde and Schiphol Airport. Fantasia Diamond, an adventure game also from Hewson. Another adventure, The Jewels of Babylon, comes to us from Interceptor. The Wise and Fool of Arnold Blackwood from Nemesis finishes up the Arnold Blackwood saga, and Manic Miner arrives in style courtesy of Amsoft, and we'll be taking a proper look at this one later in the episode. In addition to all these, a quick look at the Amstrad charts in popular computing, charts that change almost completely week by week by the way, has revealed a couple of games that have been released but not mentioned anywhere else. Hunter Killer by Amsoft. This is a submarine simulator, and I'm very surprised that we haven't seen mention of it before, but here we are. At least we've seen it now, I suppose. Meanwhile, Steve Davis Snooker from CDS is a top-down snooker simulator, as you might expect, and it's a pretty good one too. These games just sneaking into the charts without anyone mentioning their release makes me wonder just how many titles we've missed that never got into the charts or got a mention in any magazine. How many games and other pieces of software have we lost to the passage of time, unknown to pretty much anyone except their programmers? Sadly, we can never say. Moving on now, for serious users, they can get down to some serious business with Fig Fourth Standard, a fourth package from Skywave that I can't find anywhere, but a program from Aberforth with the exact same name is available online, albeit as a CPM-only title, so cassette users are sadly going to have to miss this one out. A home accounting package called FlexiFriend from Camel Micro. Amsoft brings us Screen Designer according to Popular Computing Weekly, but Amstrad User has already reviewed it, and I'm pretty sure it was released months ago. Camel strikes again with Toolbox, a compilation of utilities including AmsPict, a drawing program, AmSprite, a sprite creation program, AMerge, which I couldn't get to work, File Copy Tape File Backup, and AmsMon, which appears to be a hex editor of some sort. Kuma bring us their own version of Logo, which is sadly not as user-friendly as the CPM version from Amsoft, and Arnold's famous Maxam assembler, disassembler and monitor software has arrived. No doubt we will have more to say about this particular piece of software in a later episode. And even book lovers can get in on the action this month, since we've had the release of Dynamic Games for the Amstrad by Clive Gifford. Popular Computing were rather savage when reviewing this book, taking umbrage at its lack of explanation for the code that it contains, and describing it as simply a book full of type-ins. Personally, I see that as missing the point, but each to their own. The Amstrad Program Book by Peter Good gets an equally stiff review from Popular Computing for much the same reason as before. Basic Programming on the Amstrad by Winford James. This one got a far better response, although Popular Computing does remark that some of the subject matter isn't going into enough detail. This book would later be either reissued or expanded to become Basic Programming on the Amstrad computers, just in case you had a copy of that version and were wondering what the difference was. In a follow-up to last month's missing games, the multiple releases from Terrysoft are being advertised in the 13th of December issue of Popular Computing Weekly. This includes the Holy Grail, which we listed as missing in the last episode. Terrysoft's other advertised releases include the Holy Grail, Pontoon, Dating Game, Quizmaster, Maths 1 and Maths 2. Clearly these programs existed. Does anyone have a copy that they can make available to the community? I'm sure all of us preservationists would appreciate that. Sadly, we do have another missing game thanks to this month's list of releases. Strategy game number 11 from Camel Micro is, sadly, long recorded as missing according to CPC website CPC Rules, and I can confirm that it does indeed appear to be gone. If anyone has a copy that they can share with the community, it would be much appreciated. And that's all we have for the new releases. The charts kept changing every week in December, as you might expect in a rush to buy kids their stocking filler games. As a result, we could have had 3 different charts, all courtesy of Popular Computing Weekly. I'm going to go and make an executive decision on this one and go with the chart from the 20th of December 1984 issue for this section, because it's as close to being a Christmas Day chart as we were ever likely to get. So, let's take a look at what's in the top 10 for December 1984. At number 10 we have Roland on the Ropes from Amsoft. Straight in at number 9 is Hunter Killer, also from Amsoft. Roland in the Caves, another Amsoft classic, takes the number 8 spot. At number 7 we have Terminal Star Commander. Amsoft's Master Chess is sitting pretty at number 6. Ghouls by Micropower takes the 5th position. Codename Matt hangs in there at number 4. The Forest at World's End shows adventure games are still very popular at the start of the CPC's life, taking the number 3 spot. Harrier Attack drops to number 2 this month, and Steve Davis Snooker slips straight in at number 1. That's a bit of a change this month, and it shows that even though the CPC has only been around for 6 months, first-party titles are already slipping away in favour of third-party developers. That actually bodes really well for the CPC's future, since there are so many great titles from outside developers now available for the system. Things are shaping up well for the coming year. Tasword was created for the ZX Spectrum in 1982 by Tasman Software and was a highly respected word processor on that system. So when it was ported to the Amstrad CPC, everyone expected great things from it. Were they right to have high hopes? Let's take a look and find out. First things first, this isn't a straight port of the ZX Spectrum version. In fact, this is more like Tasword 2 for the Spectrum than the original version. Tasword on the CPC has a lot of very nice features that weren't in the original, but which would make their way into the sequel. And that's a good thing, because after the release of Amstrad last month, only the best will do for the CPC. So let's just address the elephant in the room at this point, shall we? Yes, this is Amstrad. It's exactly the same program. Tasman Software coded both programs and just changed the title so Amsoft could release a high-end title. If you've used Amstrad, you've used Tasword 464. You don't have to buy both programs to decide which is better, because they are both as good as each other. They are, in fact, exactly the same program. But Tasman didn't stop there. In 1985, Tasman would release a second version of Tasword 464 named Tasword 464D. This disk-based version of Tasword 464, released mainly to get in on the disk-loving CPC 464 and also the emerging CPC 664 user markets, featured several enhancements over the original, including the ability to handle larger files, the ability to chain several files together when printing, which essentially means you could save chapters of a book as separate files to stay within the file limit, then print them all out together as if they were one document, and the ability to pull information in from a database so that you could do a mail merge. Now that's really cool. Tasword 464D is a massive improvement over the original, which was already a superb piece of software. Small businesses, students, writers, and anyone who wanted to handle large files on the CPC would have been well served by upgrading to this version of the program. It really does add a lot that power users would need. If you just wanted it to write at your homework, or draft a letter, or an invoice or something similar, then you are probably okay sticking with the original, but for everyone else, this far surpasses the first Tasword. But Tasman didn't stop there either. They had already covered both the 464 and 664 user bases, so when the CPC 6128 came along, Tasman weren't far behind. Tasword 6128 makes good use of CPC 6128's enhanced memory capacity. Now files can be 64K in size, and this version also includes all the other improvements from the 464D version. Basically, if you're going to use Tasword on your CPC and you have a disk drive with the extra memory, then this is the version to go with. Visually, each version of Tasword is the same, which means that once you're familiar with a copy of the program, you can move over to another copy without a problem. That's a good thing, especially in a work or academic environment where you don't really have the time to mess about relearning everything. The program is also really easy to use. As we saw last episode when we took a look at the Amstrad variant of it, you could just sit down and start typing straight away, only stopping if you have to look up the commands to do a specific thing, like justify a paragraph or save the document. All in all, I can't fault Tasword. It's a very nice word processor and, as I said with the Amstrad version, it's a great piece of software that isn't all that bad to use even in the modern day, although I still say the insert command is still too slow for my liking. Nevertheless, if you need a word processor on your CPC, this family of titles will be a good choice regardless of the CPC model that you have at hand. One of the greatest platform puzzle games arrived on the ZX Spectrum in 1983. Manic Miner brought a hugely inspirational first to the Spectrum, in-game music, something that had seemed impossible at one time, but which coder Matthew Smith managed so brilliantly. I'm sorry to say the game doesn't manage to push the CPC so much as it did the Spectrum, but what we got was still so very good. In essence, the game is the same as the Spectrum version. It's colourful, yes, but it really is just the Spectrum version on the CPC, complete with the slowdown that always tends to accompany specky ports, although I am happy to say the game isn't slowed down too much in comparison with the Spectrum version, and it's still very much playable and highly enjoyable. Popular Computing compared the CPC version against the Spectrum version in a side-by-side comparison, and it turns out the game is almost identical in terms of colour and item placement, so if you've got one version, you will be right at home playing the other. As ports of classic games go, I'd say that's the right way to do it. Picking up Manic Miner on the CPC isn't like getting an inferior version, as sometimes happened with arcade ports, and okay, let's be honest, it was more than just sometimes. If you play Manic Miner on the CPC, you are playing the classic game as it was supposed to be. So what is the game actually about? Well, it's a simple one-screen action game in the old-school arcade style. You play Miner Willy and your task is to avoid the dangers while collecting items as quickly as possible, then running to the exit. The dangers change from screen to screen, and so do both the screen layouts and the items that you have to collect, which keeps the gameplay fresh. This does have the downside that sometimes the dangers aren't readily apparent on your first play of a level, but for the most part you'll know instinctively what to avoid once you've played a couple of levels. The time limit isn't bad either. You get a long oxygen bar at the bottom of the screen, and when it runs out, you lose a life. It goes down reasonably slowly, so you don't feel rushed, but there's still that sense in the back of your mind that you need to get your skates on, so the game feels well paced. The quicker you finish a level, the higher your bonus score too, so that's a nice way of moving things along. Each screen is bright and colourful with nicely designed enemies and a good layout. When playing, I never felt that the levels were impossible. It was always my fault if I couldn't make it to the next screen. That's the kind of game design that leads to thinking, oh, just one more go, I'll get it this time. And then the next thing you know, it's 4 in the morning, you've got no sleep all night, and your wife is telling you that your music keeps her awake. Speaking of music, it's not exactly testing the CPC to the limit. The sound isn't a direct specky port, I'm really happy to say that. It actually sounds immeasurably better than the Spectrum version ever did. But the jumping bleeps and the item pickup bleeps are still essentially buzzer effects that belie the Spectrum origins of the game. The music makes up for that, however, and it's very decent, but you will still get sick of it on long play sessions, so it's a good thing that you can turn the music off using the Enter key. All in all, Manic Miner is an absolute classic from the early days of the CPC. I still fondly remember when I first sat down to play it on my Amstrad, and I think you all will too. But if you don't, I highly recommend giving this one a try, because it's very definitely worth it. I'm actually jumping ahead a month with this one because it's an interesting program, or at least I think it's quite interesting. In the January-February 1985 issue of Amstrad CPC 464 User Magazine, there's a program that's essentially the trench run scene from the end of the original Star Wars film. Now, if you're expecting gameplay and graphics on the level of the Star Wars arcade game, or even the Atari 2600 port of that game, then you're going to be disappointed. But for everyone else, here's Trench from ACU issue 3. When you first see this program running, you are likely to be disappointed because it looks like a mess. How it looks isn't what made it interesting to me, however. It's the way it lays out the animation using the masked inks command, which the magazine goes into some detail about. Basically, the computer is displaying 2 colours on screen, but it uses 3 inks to do it, with the 4th ink being the static background colour. which means that we can then get a fluid 3-frame animation out of simply rotating the on-screen inks between the two colours. Now we've seen something like this in episode 2, back when we looked at the infamous shower scene program from ACU issue 1. The program drew a load of lines on the screen and then animated an image by flicking between the colours on those lines. Here we have a simple program to draw just over a third of a box on screen, then cycle the colours used to draw that box. The box is drawn in 12 lines of code, from line 280 to line 400, using one 4-next loop to do it. We can see from lines 370 and 380 that the author is using a complex system to determine which ink is doing what, and I'm sure a more seasoned programmer these days could easily do that in a quicker and less complex manner, but then again the ink value is also being used to determine the angles in the plot of each line, so perhaps it really is the simplest way of doing it. I would probably have used 2 different variables, one for plotting of the lines and the other to determine the ink colour, but maybe that's just me. Once the trench is drawn on screen, the speed at which the colours rotate is determined by a key press or using the joystick. This allows the user to control the effective speed at which passage through the trench is simulated. According to the accompanying article, this is because the trench animation is suggested for use in a game rather than as a standalone demo as we see it here. That's a pretty nice touch. The animation is controlled by lines 670 to 780, but the implementation here is, again, a bit odd. The animation is split into 3 chunks, and each chunk is called by a go subroutine in line 610, with the chunks called in turn. I don't know what calling each in turn achieves, except to show the reader that one go sub command can be used to call multiple routines in succession if the line numbers are listed after the command with a comma between each number. Now, I'll admit, that is useful information. I think we can all agree about that. But if we were coding this now, I'd be far more inclined to put all of the ink swap codes into one big routine and just call that. Except, perhaps I wouldn't, and the reason for that is to reduce the amount of coding that needs to be done to make this effect work properly. You see, the code to animate the trench when it's going backwards is essentially the same as the code for animating it going forwards, it's just presented in a different order. That means we could simplify this program immediately by taking the 3 blocks of animation code and entering each as a subroutine on its own. Then the code for going forward and the code for going backward could call each of the 3 blocks of ink changing code in a different order as needed. If we name each of these blocks of ink swapping block 1, block 2 and block 3, we can see that the code for going forwards calls block 1, then block 2 and finally block 3 before repeating itself when the forward button is pressed again. The code for going backwards calls block 1, then block 3 and finally block 2 before it repeats itself as well. So by splitting these blocks off into their own, we could cut the amount of ink swapping code in half simply by calling one set of code blocks. Now, it's only a small amount of coding that can be saved here, but when you're programming a computer with only 64K of RAM, and you want to use this as the basis of a game, which is what essentially this is designed for, well, every byte helps. Whether this lack of concise coding is to let newcomers to programming figure this stuff out on their own, or whether it's a result of the code being a rush job, I can't say for certain. What I can say is that we know from the author David Robinson's own admission that this code was rushed. Apparently his original draft for this program, plus the accompanying article explaining it, was stolen from his car and he had to rewrite the whole thing before the publishing deadline. In that respect, I think we have to take our hats off to David for just making this code not only interesting, but informative at the same time, on what must have been a very short deadline indeed. Anyway, the end result is a surprisingly fast animation. It's not amazing in terms of type-ins, but the average user probably typed this once, ran it once to see what it did, and then never took a second look. But in terms of showing just how quickly the CPC can swap inks out, and how well this can be used to create simple animations, this Star Wars Trench Run demo is rather effective. After I made available the full recording of Facehugger's Ultimate Mega Demo to accompany last month's episode, link for both in the description box below, I've received several comments asking how I recorded footage directly from my CPC. Was the CPC modded in some way to allow video to be captured from it? Was I using a special piece of software or hardware? Could anyone do this? Let's answer each of these questions in turn. First of all, the CPC is not modded. Well, not modded for video output anyway. I've mentioned in a previous episode that when I bought this CPC that I have now, it was second hand, and the previous owner had replaced the 464 ROM with a 6128 ROM, so the computer thinks it's a CPC 6128. This causes some compatibility issues in some games because of a difference in keyboard layouts or something similar to that anyway, but for the most part, the computer works as a standard CPC 6128, and the rest of the hardware is a standard early model CPC 464. No modifications to the video output of the machine are required to support recording from your Amstrad. If you want to record footage from your CPC, you will need some specialist hardware. Thankfully, the part that you would have to order special or make yourself if you're handy with a soldering iron is the same as the hardware that you will need if you want to use an LCD TV screen with your CPC in place of the original monitor. CPC to SCART cables are readily available on eBay and some specialist retro computing websites, and you will need one of these. Plug the cable into your CPC in place of the standard monitor cable, and you've finished with the CPC side of your hardware. Next, you'll need a video capture device and software, unless you want to do it the way that Vision and I do, and I'll get to that in a minute. A video capture device lets you input a video signal into your computer to record footage directly onto your machine. This is a great way of capturing footage for use in YouTube videos or sharing with friends online in whatever way you fancy. It's also a good way of using your computer as a monitor for your CPC, which is something that I do a lot because space in my office is limited and putting in yet another screen isn't an option for me. Follow the instructions with your video capture device to get it and its accompanying software, if there is any, working properly. Once you've done that, plug the SCART end of your CPC to SCART cable into the capture device and you should be good to go. If your capture device doesn't have a SCART input, and mine doesn't, you can use a SCART to composite converter, or maybe even stump up the cache for a SCART to HDMI converter. It won't make your CPC's graphics any better, but it should make the image you'll get from the video capture device a lot sharper, providing it has an HDMI input of course. The capture device that I use at the moment is an Elgato ITV hybrid. This device is about a decade old now, but it still works with the latest Elgato video capture software, so that's great news for me. I use this particular device because I record a lot of footage from a variety of retro consoles and computers, some of which only have coaxial cable output. The ITV hybrid allows input from coaxial cable, composite video and audio, and S-video, so all my retro gadget needs are covered. More modern capture devices will give better video quality when you record, but for the old stuff that I use, that's not going to make much of a difference, so I've never upgraded. The only problem that I have is the ITV hybrid isn't compatible with the video signal from an Amstrad CPC. Amstrad used an odd system for the CPC's video output, which the standard monitor that came with the computer can cope with no problem, but which a modern television and some video capture cards probably can't handle. The CPC won't send an RGB switch signal down the video feed that it outputs. Now, some TVs are built to cope with awkward machines like the old Arnold here, but others aren't, because failing to send that signal is non-standard. If you get a barely visible monochrome video signal from your CPC when using a SCART cable, that's what's happening. You can force the signal in some cases by either wiring a 9.5V battery inline on pin 8 of the SCART cable, or by using a powered CPC to SCART cable like the one that Retro Computer Shack offers. That should get your TV and video card to recognise the signal, but it won't work for all of them. Sadly, this didn't work for me with my ITV hybrid, and that's where the Vision option comes in. This is where you plug a powered SCART cable into your CPC, and instead of sticking the SCART end straight into a television or video capture card, you instead plug the SCART cable into a VHS recorder or a DVD recorder. High-end DVD recorders and VHS systems have a pass-through ability that allows televisions with only one SCART socket on them to have both a DVD player and a Sky TV box or similar device plugged in at the same time, with the signal from the Sky box or whatever passing through the DVD player and then into the television. That is a really useful option to us because as a side effect, the signal from the device plugged into the DVD recorder gets routed through the recorder's processing and then output again, which means it's not the original signal that you get from your CPC. The DVD recorder's output will contain a proper RGB switch signal, unless you've somehow managed to find one that doesn't output a standard SCART signal, which is unlikely. In other words, the DVD recorder will fix your CPC's video signal for you. As a bonus, you can record your CPC's output to DVD if you fancy doing that. Personally, I don't bother, but it is an option. Take the SCART or composite out from your DVD recorder and stick that into your TV or video capture device, and you're good to go for viewing and recording your CPC. This trick was sent to me by Vision after I badgered him about his method of video capture since I couldn't get a clear signal out of my Amstrad. You should check his channel out, by the way, it's really good. Link in the description. So there you have it, video recording for your Amstrad CPC onto a modern computer. It sounds like a bit of a hassle, and I'll admit, initial setup is a nuisance, but once you get it all plugged together, you'll be recording footage quickly and easily from there on in. Happy recording! Escape is a bright, jolly-looking puzzle action game that was entered into the Amstrad Eterno Awards in 2017. Created by CompuTeam, this is the kind of game that I would have had no problem believing was on a console. It has that kind of pick-up-and-play feel to it. The graphics are sharp and colourful, the music is decent, and the gameplay is great. This is one of those games that anyone can get to grips with very quickly, and I appreciate it for that. As with so many of the great action puzzle games, everything on it is one screen, and the skill is in determining the best way to get past the enemies to grab the item before heading to the exit, a bit like Manic Miner in that respect. The CPC excels at games like this, mostly because it means the coder doesn't have to deal with the screen refresh issues that come with scrolling games. And yes, I know that comment probably just sent a few people into a rage, but as we know, it was sadly true if the coder didn't know what they were doing. The difficulty in this game ramps up pretty quickly, which isn't always a good thing, and to be brutally honest, the controls are a little bit too responsive. Your little wizard guy will move at an incredible speed, which was the cause of many a death for me when I was playing it. Speaking of controls, I could only manage to fire to the right. I don't know whether this was an error in the way I was playing, or if you really can only fire to the right, but it made some screens next to impossible to get past unless you have lightning reflexes, which sadly I do not. The music is interesting, but I have to admit I'm not a fan. That and the odd firing mechanism are the only downsides to this game, however. I really enjoyed playing it, and I think you'll enjoy it too, even if you only give it a quick play for 5 minutes or so here and there. It's worth a download, definitely. The Dawn of Kernel is a game that took the CPC scene by storm a few months back, when videos of it first started doing the rounds. I have to admit, I wasn't taken in by the hype right away, because it seemed like a good game, sure, but it hadn't grabbed me as a great game. Oh, how wrong I was. This is a brilliant game. I'm just going to come straight out and say it right away. The music is great, the graphics are great, the gameplay is great, I love it. Created by Juan J. Martinez, whom C64 users will know as Redirac of Rescuing Orc fame, and with an intro and loading screen by Dylan Barry. The Dawn of Kernel is an action game with a strong puzzle element, and you might have noticed by now that this is just the kind of game that I adore. The basic plot of the game is that a colony has sent out a distress call and evacuated all personnel. You have been sent in by the owners of the colony to investigate the situation and make the place safe again, which you'll have to do by identifying the best way to kill everything that moves. That won't be as easy as it sounds, however, because the enemies will fight back and not all of them can be killed, or at least I couldn't figure out how to kill them. You'll need to master the thrusters that will keep you navigating on the high gravity of the colony, and also the best way to time your shots, because you can only have one shot on screen at any one time. Thankfully, so can the enemies, but that won't necessarily help you when there are multiple enemies firing at once. This is a tough game, but also a fair one. I never felt that I was dying because the game was cheating or because the level design was unfair. I always felt that it was because I'd done something wrong. And that's a sign of a well-made game, as I'm sure you'll agree. And this really is definitely a well-made game. Graphically, it's astounding. I got a sense that some real CPC classic games had influenced Dawn of Kernel. Games like Ocean's Nomad and Non-Terraquea sprung straight to mind. But even with those influences, the game felt like its own thing, and it definitely has a strong personality to it. This is another game that would work perfectly well if ported as is to a console, so it's nice to have a GX4000 version that you can drop straight onto a C4 CPC if you have one. The music is really catchy, and I will admit to leaving the game sat on the title screen as I write this review, just so that I could listen to it. It's a really nice tune, and it fits the style of the game really well. Apparently, it's written in Arcos Tracker 2, a program that I definitely intend to take a look at in a future episode, because the music that you can make with that thing is fantastic. All in all, the Dawn of Kernel is an excellent game that should be odds on to win Game of the Year in 2018 in whatever contest it gets put into. I cannot recommend it highly enough. And that's it for this month. We've covered some rather nice games and taken a look at another interesting method of doing some quick animating on the CPC. As the Amstrad's first Christmas draws to a close, the machine has firmly bedded itself in for the long haul. We've got a lot more to cover in future though, so I hope you'll join me for the next episode when we'll take our first steps into 1985. See you then!